Hi everybody, we are back again with the next step in our rendering floor plans process. And today we're going to be working on step 5, which is rendering some hard surfaces. And we're going to be looking at some standard finishes that students generally find to be a little bit challenging earlier on in the process. So a couple things to remember as we start to render these hard surfaces. Always start with a base wash of marker. And we generally start with that lightest color first. Be careful to try and stay within the lines, and you can mask areas if needed. Remember that you want to leave white areas to show high reflectivity if you can. Just know that we're working with markers and we can add more color later, but we can't take color away. Always consider your light sources and don't really worry about shadows at this point. We're going to go back and address those later on in the process. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some hard surface renderings and then kind of what the process was that I used to render them. Now, throughout your rendering career, you're going to develop your own style of rendering. So if yours looks different from mine, that is totally okay. I'm showing you how I approach it, but there's not one way to render anything, and there's not really a right or wrong way. What we judge it by is how much does it look like the original material, and are you communicating your design intent? So the first one that we're going to look at are going to be cabinets. So in my kitchen, I decided to go with a kind of a navy cabinet color. And remember, when we're rendering a floor plan, we are showing upper cabinets. So the top of your cabinets are going to be the same color as your actual cabinet, and your countertop will be whatever your countertop material is going to be. So I have my recipe handy, so I know that I'm going to be using light cerulean blue and indigo blue. Because this color is so flat, I think I'm just going to start with the indigo. And the first thing that I'm going to do is, because this is such a dark color and I really want to stay in the lines, is I'm going to carefully do an outline using this marker. And once that outline is done, I'm going to come back in and fill in with my Prismacolor marker with the blunt end. Now, sometimes students say that they have trouble getting smooth color, especially if it's a dark color, and often that's because they're trying to render in straight lines. But if you really want to get a solid color, use little circles, and that's going to give you better coverage. Now, highlights and shadows can be added later towards the end. I try to wait till later, but I always kind of start having too much fun and start adding them earlier. So I wanted to show kind of the division between areas, like this is a wall oven and this is a utility pantry closet. So just adding this little white highlight shows that this is a different cabinet. The same thing over here. This is a floor to ceiling appliance garage. This is going to be overhead cabinet for refrigerator, and this is going to be pull out pantry. So I just added these little highlights here so it didn't look like a giant blue area with no division. Also, I'm using paint that's got a sheen to it for this design, and so I've used some diagonal marks with my white pencil just to give it a bit of a reflective quality. Okay, so the next one I wanted to show you is a finish utilizing a masking technique. And there's a lot of different things you can use for masking. You can use masking tape, but that becomes a little bit dangerous if you're doing trace paper or a paper that will easily tear. You can buy artist masking or Frisket. You can get it in a liquid form, and then there's also kind of like a sticker sheet that you can cut with an X-Acto knife and use as a mask, or you can use something that is really cheap and readily available, which are post-it notes, which I find to be super handy for some things. And so for this, we're going to work on the dining room table, and I've got my recipe, so you always want to have your recipes available when you start. I know that I've got 3 colors of marker: brick beige, sienna, and dark brown. I'm going to be using the dark brown pencil and also a white pencil on here as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the process. Okay, so the first thing I did was just take the Post-its and put them around the table area. And then I'm starting with that first marker and doing an initial wash of color, just going back and forth because the table has a grain to it. So you can easily do that, and then the Post-it note's going to catch any kind of overflow for the most part. You might get some seeping in underneath, but don't worry about that. You really can't tell once everything gets rendered. Going over with that second color, keeping it kind of straight but not crazy straight because it's not a floor, so you have a little bit of leeway with that. And again, don't worry if there's little gaps in the color, it will not hurt the finish of it at all. Then I'm going to come in with that very final color and get that on there, which is the dark sienna color. Okay, and once that's done, I'm just going to let it dry for a second, and then I'm going to go ahead and peel those Post-its off. And for the most part, it kept it contained. You see that even on marker paper, you get just a touch of bleed with your markers coming through there, but we'll cover that up later. Now, after we get this done, the next step is to kind of add some more life to it with our pencils. Okay, so here our marker color is down and finished, and I'm going to come in with that dark brown pencil. And another thing that we can use the pencils for is that markers don't give you a crisp edge. They usually give you a bit of a fuzzy edge. So you can always come back with your colored pencil if you want to give something a crisp edge, or even clean up where you might have gone outside the lines just a little bit. It's a great tool for that. So I'm just adding some grain to the top of the table, just kind of coming from the edges and pulling inward. And then when I get done with that, I'm going to use my white pencil to give a highlight. So anytime that there's a shadow on an area, the other side gets a highlight. So just keep that in mind. Right. So that's it for my brown pencil. Now I'm going to come in. I want my table to look reflective, so I'm going to have some diagonal marks with my white pencil. And you can use a triangle for this. You can freehand this. If you have trouble keeping lines consistent, you might want to use your triangle, because your plan looks better if all of those kind of highlight marks throughout the plan are on the same angle. Right? So real easy, and you can blend this with a blending stick if you have that for your colored pencil, and that'll just give you a very smooth kind of color application to that. Then I'm going to hit the edge of the table with just a little highlight. Dining tables usually have a bevel edge to them, so that white highlight along the edge really helps with that. Now, if you have a light source directly above your table, you can also do kind of a little halo effect with a white pencil or with a yellow pencil. Okay. So the next example we're looking at is this breakfast table, which is in a bright orange. So for that, I have used pale vermilion, orange, white pencil, and a poppy red pencil. And this is what the finished product looks like. Now let's take a look at the process. Okay. So I'm always going to start with the lightest color marker that I have. I can always go darker, but it's going to be really hard for me to go lighter. I'm slightly worried about going outside the line, so I'm going to use the fine edge to do a border around, and just try and keep that color nice and inside the line. And then I'm going to come back with the other end of the marker, the blunt end, and just fill it all in. So again, I'm using these small circular motions to really get a solid color within that table. And once I've got the base color down, I'm going to come in with that darker poppy red. And I know that there's a lot of light sources in this kitchen, one being these two windows. So I'm going to make this side of the table the darker color rather than that side, because this is going to be getting more light to it. Now, because I put down all that orange ink first, that paper is pretty wet, so that's going to allow me to blend in. So I'm doing that orange and then that dark poppy marker, and then I'm going to grab that orange marker again just to go over it, and that's going to kind of blend it like paint and smooth out that color. Once you've got that done, let this dry for just a second, let the ink sit for a minute, and then you'll come in with your dark pencil, and anywhere that I didn't fill in along the edge of that pencil, I'll do so now with this darker pencil, and just give it kind of that darker edge to it. And I want this to look like a highly reflective table surface. So I'm now going to come in and make some reflection marks with the white pencil. You can also do this with a white paint pen. I would practice with the paint pen before you start using that because you do not want to make a mess. Some paint pens are better than others, and it's a little bit of trial and error to find out which one works best for you. Again, I have my white reflective marks to give it that high gloss look. And you want to kind of stay at that same diagonal for consistency. And when you're done, you've got a great reflective table. Okay. And the last one we're going to look at is going to be a stone countertop. So this is something very similar to a marble, and you need to work out that recipe in advance. So for this, I'm using first the colorless blender, French gray, a warm gray, a French gray 70% pencil, and then I was still not sure if I liked this French gray 40 or not. It looks like a little bit too dark for me. And this is the same finish I use on the island and on this marble table in the living room. So let's take a look on how these colors were applied to our table in the living room. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to use is the colorless blender. And you might be saying, well, there is no color. But I'm using the colorless blender to wet the paper. So think of it like priming the paper. What I want is for the color to be applied, but I want it to have really fuzzy edges. So I'm using the colorless blender to give it that wet that paper, so when I start going over it with my grays, it'll accept it and it's not going to sit and be very pronounced. And here I'm just dabbing it in very loosely, just coming in with the color, and it's really helpful the way that the ink kind of pulls in certain areas. It gives it a nice marble effect. The trick with doing those stone surfaces are you have to get colors that are, work well together. You can't do one that's a lot darker than the other. And then I'm coming in with the other gray just to give it some more dimension. And once you've got that the way that you like it, you're going to come in with your pencil. You cannot do the veining with your marker. It's just too thick. If things are not blended enough for you, or you want the edges to be softer, you can go over it with your colorless blender one more time and it'll rub out a little bit of those edges. Okay, then I'm going to come in with my French gray pencil and just very abstractly work in this lines to make it look like veining across there. And remember, it's not a wrong or a right way. Just do what you think looks correctly. It's actually a lot harder to look at a picture of a marble or granite and duplicate it. It's a little bit easier to freehand that while you're actually doing it. And when I get done doing my veining, I'm just going to give it a little bit of shadow around the edge before I add in the color for my rim of my table. And that's it. So it's really simple. Just apply the color very gingerly and easy, and remember to blend for those stone surfaces. All right, everyone, that's it for rendering hard surfaces. Next up, we're going to be rendering some soft furnishings and rugs.